First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing such an immense regional conference on a very important topic, gender-based violence. And I'm happy to join this event as a keynote speaker in the last session, strengthening connections and escalating momentum. I come from Nepal, and I have worked in my more than 3 decades of experience. Gender-based violence or violence against women has been the center of my focus. And today, prominently, I will be sharing my own experiences, working, my observations and my learnings as an activist working from the grassroots to the national, regional, and global level, particularly in terms of addressing and working with survivors of violence, helping to establish women's shelters, advocating for legislative changes, monitoring its implementation, and strengthening movement across communities and sectors. So, and personally also as now a member of the CEDAW committee, so I will be talking a lot about the CEDAW obligations as well. So I will start by giving you an overview of the present trend and gaps on gender-based violence, and I have derived some statistics from a UN Women document. Violence against women takes multiple forms. Especially intimate partner violence is the most common form of domestic violence. Although the percentage of women and girls killed by their partners or family members is greatest in Africa, Asia hosts the largest number of women and girls killed overall. In East Africa and the Pacific, in East Asia and the Pacific, women and girls make up 77% of trafficked persons. In some countries of the region, young girls still undergo some form of female genital mutilation. About 650 million girls and women alive today have been married before reaching the age of 18, and 44% of all child brides are from South Asia, and 12% are from East Asia and the Pacific. Violence against women in the Asia-Pacific region is also perpetrated through sexual and street harassment, menstruation stigmatization, and lack of access to hygiene products, dowry-related violence, forced marriage, digital harassment, and cyber violence, marital rape, and lack of access to justice and survivor-centered support systems. However, some significant progress has also been made in ending violence against women in the region. 90% of countries in the region have dedicated laws on ending violence against women, compared to less than 50% in 2010. A third of the countries in the region have now criminalized marital rape. 9 countries now have dedicated national action plans. In November 2015, ASEAN member states adopted the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. 24 countries conducted national prevalence studies on violence against women, and data collection has improved. As of 2019, 26 countries have national statistics on intimate partner violence. Thus, in majority of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, significant improvements have been made in legal frameworks, policies, action plans, and initiatives to curb gender-based violence and harmful practices, including shifts in public opinion. Incremental data reporting and enhancement of indicators are positive steps growing in the region. However, immense range of challenges still persist, as this is a region marred by impacts of ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis. May I share some observation based on CEDAW engagement with state parties of the region? Rapid economic development ventures have increased exploitation of women and girls in employment, migration, and economic life. Communal violence, politically targeting violence on women and girls of different religious, marginalized minorities groups persist. Stereotypes and harmful practices are prevalent in many societies. Compounded effects on women and girls with disabilities and other vulnerable groups facing intersectional discrimination is rampant. May I also share, because we are in the midst of a pandemic, may I share some impacts of the COVID-19, particularly on gender-based violence. Recent statistics indicate that as much as 5-fold increase has been recorded in relation to the intimate partner violence due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the Asia-Pacific region, COVID-19 is disrupting planned efforts to end child marriage and cause wide-reaching economic consequences. We don't need statistics to know what is the gravity of the gender-based violence during the COVID-19. Gender-based violence increased 4-fold, 5-fold, so much so, even in developed countries, so much so that the UN Secretary General called it a shadow pandemic. It was as grave as a pandemic, or even more. Men, the ILO has said that from among the people who lost their jobs, it was 70% of women, because women work in the informal sector. They do not have any insurance or social security packages, and they are the first one to lose income, security, and jobs. The burden of work in the house had, in compared to men, women are now working 3- to 4-fold more, because now with everyone in the house, particularly during lockdowns, women had to do not only working women had to manage their official work, they had to look after the children, juggle with their homeworks, juggle with their professional work, and cater to the demands of family members. So their burden has increased terribly 3 to 4 times. Access to health services has been poor, particularly in regard to sexual and reproductive health services. Many hospitals have been turned into COVID hospitals, and regular services are very scarce. More so, in the health sector, it is 70% of the health professionals are women, and they are the frontline workers, not in the decision making. So their security is also at stake. So this is the immense challenge brought about by the pandemic, which is called as the shadow pandemic by the Secretary General. And now I would like to go to CEDAW, which is an accountability framework. Women's right to live free from violence is upheld by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women, CEDAW. I just joined your convention in the beginning, the first day, a little bit, and I saw Jesus Shin share some aspects of the CEDAW convention. She touched on it, so I will elaborate a little bit in the context of violence against women. CEDAW is the strongest accountability framework on acts of gender-based violence since 1979. My own experience, even before, I have been a CEDAW committee member since 2017, and this is my second mandate. But even before I was a CEDAW committee member, as an activist, I have been engaged with the CEDAW mechanism in terms of training community women and girls to tell them what CEDAW is about and how to engage in it, to strengthen advocacy through media processes, and also in drafting shadow reports and observing the concluding observations, and based on the recommendations, advocating with governments for policy changes in the context of Nepal. So even before I was a CEDAW committee member, I understood the power, the use, the potential strength of the CEDAW committee as an accountability mechanism to make governments accountable. I would like to highlight some of the CEDAW articles that address gender-based violence. Article 5 obligates the state parties to take measures to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women, which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes, or on stereotyped roles for men and women. Article 10 ensures women equal rights with men in the field of education. Article 12 ensures access to health services, including sexual and reproductive rights, safe abortion, and contraceptives for women and girls in need. Article 16 calls to eliminate discrimination against women in all matters relating to marriage and family relations, as well as enforce minimum age of marriage to end child marriage. We know that the root cause of the persistent violence in the region is ingrained in deep-rooted social, cultural, and religious norms, stereotype and stigma, and harmful practices. CEDAW has increasingly tackled harmful practices when examining and ensuing dialogue with state parties, and in their concluding observations, calling for prompt actions on violations of rights caused through the prevalence of harmful practices, through shelter and rehabilitation services, reintegration and enabling economic empowerment for victims and survivors. The means and modalities for intervention to eliminate harmful practices have been developed by the CEDAW Committee, also through its General Recommendation 19 and 35 on violence against women. Thus, the prohibition of gender-based violence against women has evolved into a principle of customary international law, which would be applicable in the Asia-Pacific region. The Joint General Recommendation 31 of CEDAW and CRC provides authoritative guidance on legislative, policy, and other appropriate measures that must be taken to eliminate gender-based violence and harmful practices. The concluding observations of CEDAW mechanism is a powerful tool to stimulate and accelerate positive changes. To take reference from my own country, Nepal, it was recommended by the committee in its concluding observations in 2011 to criminalize harmful practices such as chaupadi, which is menstrual segregation or isolation, dowry, accusation of witchcraft, discrimination against Dalit persons, and child marriage. Many civil society organizations mobilized their advocacy tools, synchronized their actions and resources towards this goal as an important endeavor for some number of years, as an outcome of which Nepal has introduced extensive legislation of criminalization of the acts. In its subsequent periodic review in 2018, the efforts for change were well acknowledged by the committee. Last year in 2020, responding quickly to the impact of COVID-19, the CEDAW committee adopted a guidance note for state parties to ensure women without hindrances full access to healthcare, safe shelters, education, employment, and economic life. It reminded state parties of their obligations towards disadvantaged groups of women and women in conflict of other humanitarian situations. It also urged state parties to protect women from discrimination and ensure accountability for gender-based violence and guarantee their participation in policy and decision-making in all crisis responses and recovery efforts. The guidance note now serves as an important benchmark to assess the countries which will be reviewed in the post-pandemic era, thereby evaluating the adequacy, gaps, and areas for reforms. The CEDAW committee has been underlining that the women and girls should have access to basic services and infrastructure, including sexual and reproductive, mental and other health services, education, including in their own languages, economic empowerment programs, employment opportunities, women's leadership programs, including the youth entrepreneurship and apprenticeship program, and to create employment and income generating opportunities in rural areas. The CEDAW committee has consistently recommended to raise awareness among traditional and religious leaders, parents, teachers, women, and the general public about the criminal nature and devastating impact of gender-based violence, both on the lives of women and girls, including in the overall impacts for the society. And now coming to strengthening connections and escalating momentum through regional mechanisms, I would like to say on my observation as a CEDAW committee member that regional mechanisms on violence against women and women's rights play decisive roles in monitoring implementation of the human rights efforts to tackle violence and discrimination against women. Their recommendations provide an overview of the most important and urgent women's human rights issues in any given country, presenting an authoritative analysis of issues, gaps, and shortcomings in implementation and commitments. Through strengthened cooperation, regional mechanisms on women's rights and violence against women can come up with joint positions, enhanced information sharing, data and communications tools to work towards harmonized strategies and undertake joint actions. Regional mechanisms can also engage with the work of the treaty bodies by providing briefs prior to country review, provide submissions relevant to upcoming periodic reports, or by suggesting individual cases of human rights concern that might be relevant. It can also contribute to the development of general recommendation of the CEDAW committee or any other committee. Based on CEDAW assessment, we have observed that regions that have regional conventions or mechanisms to eliminate violence against women place gender-based violence as a priority for justice and policy reforms. They help to develop specific strategies for strengthening regional human rights protection systems in the area of gender-based violence. The strategies are implemented through combined actions of the region through political dialogue, cooperation with third countries, and financing through existing funds. Regional gender-based violence strategies provide avenues of cooperation, facilitation of exchange, and cooperation among regional systems have strengthened support for capacity building of institutional systems. They help in building common points of cooperation, such as border cooperation in tackling traffickers. They promote sharing of good practices, discussion, and exploration of cross-regional challenges, and encourages exchange of information and documentation. May I share one example of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, predominantly known as the Istanbul Convention, which is the first legally binding instrument in Europe and the field of violence against women and domestic violence. In terms of scope, it is the most far-reaching international treaty to tackle this serious violation of human rights. It draws up and publishes reports evaluating legislative and other measures taken by the parties to give effects to the provision of the convention. Okay. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought I got disrupted. I'm so sorry. Yeah, it draws up, to continue, it draws up and publishes reports evaluating legislative and other measures taken by the parties to give effects to the provisions of the convention. In cases where action is required to prevent any acts of violence covered by the convention, it can also initiate an inquiry. In the region, we all know we have the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on the Elimination of Violence Against Women since 2015, which is contributing to address violence against women holistically. But perhaps it is time now that we should have a larger Asia-Pacific regional human rights mechanism for transformative change in the region and should initiate collective action and advocacy for it. And I'm all for it. I would support such an initiative to establish a regional mechanism to end violence against women and promote human rights. In conclusion, for strengthening connection and escalating momentum, we need to hear the voices and experiences of young girls in our advocacy work. We have to promote intergenerational dialogues. We must prioritize women's leadership in all fields, collaborate with educational and faith-based institutions. We must also engage with men, boys, and youth to promote healthy masculinities. We must ensure services for survivors of violence be regarded as essential services with adequate resources and measures to support health, social, and justice responses. We must continue to monitor the implementation of laws related to violence against women and advocate for needed amendment in discriminatory laws with active engagement with the CEDAW process. In conclusion, again, finally, we must continue to strengthen our collective movement across borders, regardless of religion, age, class, caste, sexual orientation, disability, to advocate for ending violence against women. Let us stand together for a just and gender equal world. Thank you.